Hello there, I'm Leo Waldock and this is Kit Guru TV. The case we have here is the Fractal Design Define R5, which is a bit of a tongue twister. Now you might think the R5 looks similar to the R4 that came before it about a year ago. You'd be quite correct. Externally they are very similar. Internally there are some subtle changes to the R5 which make it quite a different proposition to the R4. As you can see, this is the black version. It doesn't have a window launch. There will be a window version coming. This is about £93. The windowed version is going to be a penny under £100. You can also get the case in white or black with what they call titanium front panel, means silver. So there are 6 colour options therefore, if you include the windows, and that's the same as the R4. Now then, it's quite a heavy case. It weighs in just over 10 kilos bare, and the reason is, if I just pop off the left hand side panel, which is held with 2 thumb screws, these bitumen sound deadening panels, they're quite heavy. The emphasis with this case is on quiet. It's plastic over steel, and we have noise deadening material inside that front door there, and also inside the main panel, which is a tool-free design. Pops off and there you go. Now that panel there is called Moduvent, and these 1, 2, 3 panels on the top are the same. The idea is the case is sealed to keep it quiet, but if you want to open it up to flow extra air, you can. So it starts quiet by default. Start opening it up, change the cooling configuration, and it will get noisier obviously, but you'll also flow a lot more air. So you pay your money and you take your choice on that score. Now then, the big change between the R4 and the R5 is the configuration of the drive bays, which looks, you must think, fairly conventional. Now before I start monkeying around with these, let's just look at the main compartment. It's quite large. It'll take an ATX motherboard. If I offer up this Sapphire R9 290 Trix graphics card, if I slip it in where it would go, you can see it just fits in by the drive bays. So you don't have to remove any drive bays to fit a conventional graphics card. So the drive bay configuration is not affected by any conventional graphics setup you might have, which is good. Certain cases we've seen you have to remove drive bays once you get beyond a standard graphics card and get into big gaming territory. Now the drive configuration, you've got 2 optical drives at the top, 5 hard drive bays there, 3 at the bottom. These little caddies that come out, they're steel, and you let's just refer to the accessory box. You line up your drive, whether it's a 3.5 or a 2.5, and use some rubber bobbins and some screws. Now here's the box of accessories, and here's all the stuff. And my first thought was, oh goodness, once again no labels. On the back of the box, Fractal Design has given you pictures and descriptions of what all the fasteners do, which is very elegant and works nicely. So you take a bobbin, 4 bobbins, you take 4 of these screws on with the hard drive and it's isolated, or you can screw an SSD or a 2.5 inch drive to the 1, 2, 3, 4 screws in the center there. Screw it on direct. Nice and easy, and that goes back in there. However, if you're using SSDs, you're more likely to use these 2 stealth bays on the back of the motherboard tray. That's certainly my preferred choice. So thumb screw, off it comes, lay it in place, 4 screws. The 4 screws are not necessary. When I did the build I actually used 2. It would be even better if they used some sort of friction grip method. You'd think actually that instead of having to screw the SSD to the bracket, you'd actually be able to simply release that, kind of clamp it in, but instead it sits there, and there we go. Anyway, so you've got 8 drive bays that can take 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives, and you've got your 2 SSDs bays there, which realistically is way more than you're going to need. While we're looking at the accessories, and you do get everything you need, the motherboard standoffs, we have 1 standoff installed by default, which is on this little domed job, so you can just lay the motherboard in place and just drop it on, so it just hooks onto the I/O panel. That's nice. And then you get 8 standoffs in the pack. I don't quite understand this, because 9 will give you everything you need, and manufacturers these days, they seem to give you 1 short of the correct number. However, on the plus side, Fractal Design does give this little nylon tool for driving home these standoffs with a screwdriver crosshead in the back. So fair play to them there. The manual is multilingual, naturally, 6 languages or so, and that's all fine. We've had a few comments on some of these reviews about manuals, and 1 or 2 voices seem to think that if you need to use a manual to build a PC, you're some sort of muppet. Now, personally, I disagree. For one thing, I think if a manual is included, it should be a good manual. I don't mind if it's just a setup sheet or some such. People like IKEA, for instance, will give you just pictograms, no words at all, to tell you how to put your furniture together. It takes a lot of work to do something simple that's elegant and that works and that is clear. Fractal Design has done a really good job here. Installing the power supply, so you've got the case in white, power supply is blue. You put the power supply in, 4 screws. It's really straightforward. Taking off a side panel, blue latch to remove the panel, and so on and so on. They help. If you don't need to use it, don't refer to it, that's fine. Now the thing is that once we get through the basics of the manual and we get onto the drive bays, actually the manual really comes into its own because it's relatively complicated, and the reason is this. The R4 case was limited to a double slot radiator design, which essentially would go there. This R5, you can remove the optical drive bay that opens up the entire top of the case, and that means you can have up to a 420mm radiator. Basically any cooling system you can imagine can go in the top, and then when we get down to the front, opening that up again and just pop off the air filter there. And we've got 2 fan housings, one occupied by a 140mm fan from the factory, one empty, so you can add a second fan if you feel the urge, or you could put a radiator in the place. At the back we've got a standard 140 fan, again from Fractal Design, so 140 front, 140 back, and the top is just begging for a liquid cooler for your CPU, or of course you could put an air cooler on there. So they've given you the option of removing these drive bays and moving the caddies around. That's the other part of this. Now personally, I don't see that many people are going to want to install 8 hard drives, but what they've done by splitting them 5 and 3 is they've given you the choice, not 4 and 4, 5 and 3. So if you want 1 or 2, they can go in the stealth bays. You want up to 3 data drives, there you go, the small caddy. Up to 5, the big caddy. If you want to go beyond 5, then you need both caddies, which is really straightforward. So if we just undo these 2 screws here, thumb screws, and they're captive, I think, unless they drop, pull the caddy out. There we go. Now it slides on these nylon little pads here, 4 top, 4 bottom, engaging these grooves. So it's not just sort of sitting in place, it is locked in place. And then we can remove the bottom caddy. And there are some, oh yes, that's right. At the bottom of the case, under the air filter, boop, boop, boop. Can't remember if it comes out to the front or the back. Oh yes, so open the door, out with the enormous air filter from the bottom section. And that reveals these 4 screws here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this square pattern, you'll notice, I hope, coincides with all of the fan openings. And this is quite a neat trick that they've pulled off here. Because what they've essentially done is they've said wherever you can mount a fan, if you choose, you can instead mount a drive housing. Now at the bottom of the case, they do say, Fractal Design says you can mount fans, but given that your power supply is going to go at the bottom and you'll have a whole bunch of cables, I'm not so sure that's a clever idea, particularly as they have given so many other options. But that's really the name of the game with the R5, it's options. You're not obliged to do it in any particular way. Right, that's out. Let's put it back up. So now you can see both hard drive bays are removed. Now let's just turn to the optical drive bay. That's a screw on this side. I must confess my personal preference is to have an optical drive, but it's absolutely and in no way essential these days. I don't recall the last time I actually bought a game on disc. Steam is our friend these days. So optical media, it's more actually I think these days for burning CDs and such like, and I tend to do that for more like members of the family than for myself. Right, let's just pop out the third thumb screw and then the fourth and see if we have a dropping of hardware. Right, that should be that. Turn it round and pull it backwards. There we go. And with the pull it was free. So there's the optical drive bay. You'll see there the keyways for the hard drives to slide into place. So we've got a fair amount of hardware lying around now, but the point is that the case is entirely open. Now, if you mount a liquid cooler in the roof of the case, of course, that's going to require airflow, and this is where these modu vents come into operation. And if I look inside and pop that free, right, that's one of the slightly more fiddly parts of the job, is finding these tiny little clips and releasing them. They sort of hook in place and then snap at the back, and again they've got noise deadening material too. And then if we open up the second one, again if I can find the little doohickeys, there's one, there's two. There we go, and two. And then the third if you're using a ginormous liquid cooler to do at the front. So there we have it. So a certain amount of fiddling around there, but it strips down quite nicely. And then the question becomes, if you're using, obviously optical drives do need to go at the top, at the front, because clearly that's where the little blanks are. Pop that out, pop that out. So optical drive bay, if you're using optical drive bay, it has to go at the top at the front. You haven't really got any choice about that unless you're getting the modding some sort of other opening. However, hard drives, you've got a load of options. You can put your caddies, if you like, once you remove the 5 bay, once you remove those little nylon pads, you can put that, if you like, at the top of the case or at the bottom, or in the middle. They've given a colossal range of options. I suspect that most of us are going to use almost none of those options, because most of us are going to use a 240 or 280mm radiator in the top. We're going to keep the optical drive bay and we'll take out whichever of the hard drive caddies we don't require. But the options are legion, and that's really good news. So if I just close up that door, other than that, we've got the conventional power and reset buttons at the top. We've got 2 USB 2, 2 USB 3, and the LEDs. We've got cable grommets here. We've got all the gubbins there. These SATA power connector here, the reason for that is that behind the door at the top, we have a fan controller which can handle up to 3 fans, as there are 2 fans by default from the factory. Plug those into your fan controller, and then you can add a third fan, whether you choose to use your liquid cooler that way or a CPU air cooler. That's up to you, of course, but it means that the number of headers on your motherboard is almost an irrelevance. So at first glance, they've done a lot to change the R5 from the R4, and there are no obvious problems with it. The only thing I look at this case and wonder about is when Fractal Design will start using power supply covers. But apart from that, it's a clever bit of design, and they've given you options. Well, look at all the bits and pieces I've got scattered around, but options by the ton. And you can install pretty much any liquid cooler in this case that you fancy. So those of you that say you don't need the manual, I must confess in this instance I particularly disagree. But this case, this is looking very interesting, so let's see how we get on with it. When I started my build in the R5 case, I had to make a few decisions about the components I was going to use. The main decision you have to make is, are you going to use a DVD drive or not? Because if you do, you're keeping that drive bay. If you're keeping the drive bay, you're restricting yourself to a double radiator, so up to 280mm. If you're dumping the optical drive, which most people would regard as no big deal, then you can go for the full-length triple radiator. That makes a huge difference to your options. Let's just pop off the side panel and show you the back of the motherboard. And here we have SSD in the stealth bay. That's in one of these little gizmos here, which latches in that away, like, hang on, wrong way around. That away like so, and then thumb screw. I only retained that SSD with 2 of the 4 screw holes because it just didn't seem necessary to use 4 mounting screws. What else have we got? Huge cutout in the back of the motherboard tray, great success there, masses of access. Curious enough, these 2 little cable cutouts here and the grommets, when I fed the 8-pin EPS connector through, it's a 4+4, I actually had to split the 2 blocks and feed 4 through, reconnected. It's actually too tight to fit an 8-pin connector through there, which is a real surprise. No doubt if I wanted I could have popped a grommet out or something, but it was a few millimeters shy of what I wanted. A bit more space would be good. What else have we got? Yeah, the Velcro straps, which we've seen with a number of cases, but particularly recently with Fantex, they work well, we like those. On the other hand, tie down points or anchor points for cable ties, there's one here, there's one there, one there. There are a few, but really a bunch of them, 10 or even 20 would be excellent, and it means you don't have things like this fan wire hanging loose. Not a big deal, but it just helps. So what else do we have? Let's spin around and pop off the other panel, which is the tool-free one. Now you'll notice here, and I'm going to refer to my notes, this modu vent. I can't get used to that word, modu vent. I left that in this panel. It's the one that's held on with 4 screws. Now I put in the top of the case, I went for a 240mm Corsair H100i liquid cooler all in one. So I've taken off the 2 modu vent. I'm getting their panels there, leaving the one on the front. So that opens up the top. I've used these in push mode, so it's drawing air from inside the case and out, exhausting through the top. And that worked very well, nice and tidy. I was able to keep the standard rear fan. Hoses cleared it nicely, that's terrific. Now you'll notice I've taken out the 5 drive bay here, leaving the optical drive, leaving the 3 at the bottom. Now as it happens, my Sapphire R9 290, which is a fairly hefty graphics card, would have fit in with that bay in place. I just removed it because I didn't need it, and you know, a bit of extra airflow is always a good thing. But it was nice to see even a thunderous graphics card goes in, and look, masses of space. So gamers have got no concern, and you can obviously easily fit 2, 3, 4 cards, whatever, in place, no problem at all. At the bottom, the notes tell you what your options are with cooling. If you've basically got up to 300mm of space, so depending on the length of your power supply defines whether or not you can have a 120 or 140mm fan in there. That Acasa 1000 watt Freedom power supply is quite a big unit. Even so, I could have snuck a fan in there. There's just no point. Plus, also the idea of a fan whirring away beneath those cables doesn't really fill me with joy. But the fact was, I didn't need it. With the standard 140mm fan at the front, the standard at the rear, and then the 2 on the Corsair liquid cooler, the cooling was really good. Quiet cases have a bit of a habit of being a tad warmer than free-flowing designs. This worked well. Reaching from the test figures, so that's a Core i7 4770K there. So it's a fast, 8 core with hyper-threading processor. At idle, we had 45 decibels, which is in a quiet office. In other words, it's really very quiet. You can hear it, but it's really, really quiet. The CPU idle to 27 Celsius, GPU at 31. Those figures are entirely normal. Under heavy load, that's with Thermark and Prime running, The noise levels rose very slightly to 46 decibels at the front, 46.5 at the side. Perhaps when they come up with the window design, which is promised to us reasonably soon, and I would imagine if it's like the R4, the window will fill about half of the panel. Perhaps that 46.5 decibels at the side will go up a little bit, maybe 47. It's tougher to make a windowed panel quiet. But temperatures, this is the key thing. The CPU temperature went up to 75 Celsius and this is under heavy load. And that's absolutely in line with other cases we've done recently. The NZXT S340 exactly the same 75, Silent Base 800 recently 71. On the other hand, other designs have been warmer. So 75, I'm happy with that. The GPU was 76, which is absolutely bang in the middle of the mark. So the CPU is a little bit warmer than some cases that we've seen, but with a quiet case, that's the usual trade-off. You want it quieter, you get it a bit warmer. It was a little warmer, but it wasn't at all hot. Very impressive work indeed. And it was so quiet, it was almost hard to believe. So there we go. So I've hung on to the optical drive bay, I've put a 2 terabyte data drive down there, put an SSD on the back. My choice of components, to be honest, is fairly mainstream. If I was being more radical, dumping that, filling out a cooling, or going for a GPU liquid cooler perhaps, that seems to be the trend that we're heading towards, then I could have put a liquid cooler at the back, or indeed at the front. Cosmetically, I'm happy with the build. It would have been nice if we'd had a power supply cover, because that always looks better. So we can see all the hardware. However, I don't know about you, I think it looks quite smart. Summing up, the Fractal Design Define R5 is not especially difficult. It leans heavily on the R4 that comes before it, as you'd expect, and it's those clever drive bays that makes the big difference. The way you can take out the drives in modules, move them around. Basically, how many drives do you want? Do you want optical drives? Do you want lots of hard drives? What do you want to do? Or are you going to settle for the 2 SSD bays and the stealth bays behind the motherboard tray? That pretty much dictates how you're using the case. Once you've decided that, that then sorts out what sort of space you've got in the front of the case between the fan and the graphics card or graphics cards, and then that in turn says how much space you've got at the top of the case and whether or not you shut down these module vents or leave them open. I, as you saw, have gone for the fairly straightforward approach, take out the big 5 caddy in the middle, loads of space in front of my graphics cards, nice flowing, nice airflow flowing through the case. And I've opened up 2 of the 3 vents at the top. Frankly, that's the lazy approach. It worked very well, however. If you're after the huge cooler, then this case is an absolute winner. So I like it. It's an impressive piece of work, and the way they've developed the R4 into the R5, it shines through. It's such a clever idea. Those drive bays, very good indeed. I've got here a list of the things I don't like about the R5. I want 5 to 10 millimeters more space behind the motherboard tray, so that much. You only get 8 standoffs rather than 9 motherboard standoffs, that is. Cable tie down points behind the motherboard tray. I want a few more of those. The 2 little cable routing holes at the top of the motherboard tray where the EPS connectors go through, and these front panel headers up here, the USB 3 connectors, they're black and they should be blue. That's it. I mean, frankly, it's a trivial list of complaints, and it's the sort of thing that can be fixed in a blink of an eye. So I'm completely impressed by this case. I can't wait to see the windowed version, but as things stand, Fractal Design, you've done good work here. The R5, it's a winner. 9 out of 10 easy peasy, and I'm really impressed by this piece of hardware. This is Leo Waldock for Kit Guru TV.